Welcome back, my favorite Tzaddikim and Hasidim. Hope you are doing well, as always. In this episode, we are continuing with discussing Christian Deconstructionism with Miss Christy Burke. Let's go.
So many people who are leaving the church have had bad experiences. The number one reason people are giving for leaving the church is not believing. They don't have belief. But a lot of people are also leaving because they've been hurt. They've been mistreated, and he'll talk about that in a minute. And I'm telling you, there's no empathy there. Um, he's advocating for the shunning of people who walk away instead of supporting them, loving them, giving them the free will that their God has allegedly given them. I don't know. I don't know John MacArthur's stance on free will. I would bet he's probably a Calvinist, but um, I don't see the love of Jesus in that what he just said. I don't see any love or compassion or empathy. I see a man who hopes that the church members will start shunning people who leave the church. And that's exactly what a lot of them are doing.
And it's directly related to and relevant to our church life today because Christianity has so many forms under just that broad term. There are heretical churches where the gospel is not taught, the deity of Christ is not believed. Modern liberal churches, we might call them.
So he goes on and on. He lists all the different churches that are heretical, that aren't teaching the true doctrine. I just think it's so interesting that people like him stand up on a pulpit and they point their fingers at all these other denominations and everyone else who claims Christianity and says, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, and I'm right. I have the right interpretation. I have the right relationship with God. I know the divine truth. Also, I'm very humble because Jesus told us to be very humble and meek.
Let me say this, that these defections are not happening because people are studying the Bible deeply and profoundly and digging into the scripture and finding that in studying the Bible, they have concluded that Christianity isn't true. That doesn't happen.
Well, Johnny Mac, I can tell you and I can guarantee you that that is 100% back-ass words wrong. And I know that because I personally went through it. This isn't a matter of interpretation or of perspective. I'm going to tell you how I went through this. And I don't normally share my story or, my testimony. In part because I just think testimonies are boring and kind of stupid. I don't really care about them. They're not always boring and stupid. Just a lot of the time they kind of feel that way. To me personally, if you enjoy them, that's fantastic. I hope that does well for you. I have no criticism of testimonies. I just don't tend to be enthused by them because they're largely emotional. And, I'm going to be convinced by if you lay the facts out, if you give me a good, chunky, scholarly article or book or whatever, present the facts to me and you'll affect my heart. You try to affect my heart, I'm going to reject it because of the facts. Right? So these people who have emotional arguments for why God exists, like, I've experienced the Trinity. Hell no, you haven't. Shut up. Or they'll even say things like, or the end statement or claim, I completely agree with, like the existence of God. But they'll get there using really goofy, emotion-ridden language, and it's like, I want to be an atheist now because what you said was so stupid, and I hate it, and you're ugly, and like, I just want to slap you. Like, is this correct? Is this right of me to feel this way? No, of course not. But I'm telling you that this is the way that I feel. So, anyway, my point being, I am not fond of testimonies, but I'm going to give you a little bit of my testimony right now. So, I was raised as an, let's say, conservative fundamentalist evangelical Protestant. In other words, I was a Free Methodist, which is like the conservative branch of Methodism. It's not the pro-gay, pro-feminism Methodists. And so you can tell where I fall on the conservative liberal spectrum here, typically. So I was raised as a Free Methodist, which is pretty evangelical, which is very, very similar to where John MacArthur is coming from, right? John MacArthur, Billy Graham, Chuck Swindoll, Ravi Zacharias, like a lot of these people, preachers and apologists, these were heroes growing up. And as a teenager, I started looking at myself thinking, I do this, I do that, I don't do this, I don't do that. Wow, I suck at being a Christian. I guess I'm not one then, because to be a real Christian, right? This was the no true Scotsman fallacy at work here when I was 18. By comparison, I'm 32 now. I looked at myself when I was 18. And I thought, well, if it takes A, B, and C to be a true Christian, I don't do A, B, and C, or A, B, and C are not true of me. I believe in God. Sure, I believe in Jesus, but I'm just a bad Christian. So I guess I'm not one. And I slowly became an atheist. Yes, that's right. I was formerly an atheist. I truly did not believe in the existence of God and the divine origin of the world. And look at me now, It's like that scene from Monty Python where he says, she's
She
turned
turned
me
me
into
into
a
a
newt.
newt.
And they look at him
A
and
newt.
he says, I got
Got
better.
better.
I I was turned into an atheist, but I got better. And so, excuse that terrible accent. I'm sorry, people from the UK. So, but it's like that. It's like I got over it eventually. But it's because I was studying the formal principles of logic and I was studying science. And I know if there's any atheists listening to this, it's like, oh, brother, you're going to say that you reasoned yourself out of this without any help. Yeah, I did. I was a genuine atheist. I genuinely did not believe in God. I realized, well, something had to cause all of this, simply put. And that thing could not itself have been caused. And so ultimately, I started looking into all these different religions because I thought, well, if there is such a thing as truth at that time, I thought, well, it's probably more likely that people knew it than that they didn't know it. And if nobody did know it, well, I guess I'm just SOL. I don't know what to say. But I was open to that possibility. Like, there's truth out there and I want it. And so I started looking into all these different religions. In fact, the very first religion that I looked into was Rasta, like Rastafarianism. And I call it Rasta because if you know anything about Rasta, you know that they don't like the term Rastafarian. It is just called the Rasta. And so I looked into this. Turns out that the guy who they called the Messiah said that he was not the Messiah, right? Emperor Haile Selassie, I think it was the third. He comes to Jamaica. They're like, hey, there's these Rasta guys, these Rasta men, and they think that you're the Messiah. They think that you're Mashiach. He says, whoa, I'm an Ethiopian Orthodox Christian. I've got to set these people straight because I'm definitely not the Messiah. Now, granted, he believed that he was from the Solomonic kingly line, but he wasn't the Messiah. He wasn't Jesus. So he comes to Jamaica. He says, look, guys, I'm not the returned Jesus. And the Rasta said, yeah, you are. He's like, no, I'm not. Please believe me. Like, it's coming from my own mouth. You don't have to take anybody's report for it. And they said, oh, no, you're just being humble. And they still believe it to this day, as far as I know. And so I realized Rasta can't be true when the hero of their faith denies it. All right, so that's out for me. I looked into Buddhism. They say you have to become one with nothing. Well, logically, you can't become one with nothing because else, what are you becoming one with? A one cannot become united with a zero. It doesn't make any sense, right? You have to have like terms. So Buddhism's out. And then I started looking into all these different polytheisms, like Hinduism and Greek and Roman and Egyptian and Norse and Celtic polytheisms. And they all had the same fatal flaws of there had to be some ultimate cause of existence. And that ultimate cause of existence cannot, by definition, be overpowered by its offspring. Because it would require, like from a physics perspective, it would require more energy than what the original cause had to give to overpower the original cause. And in so many of these mythologies, you have the creator god being overpowered or outsmarted by the lesser deities. And then you have a new pantheon arise, and they replace the old pantheon. It's like, well, it doesn't make any sense. And that's beside the fact that you have you have multiple gods. Like, there's a chief god, and the chief god's not large and in charge. That doesn't make any sense. So that annihilated all of the polytheisms that could possibly exist, and it basically left me with Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. I had a Bible, so I had the Old Testament, New Testament, so that covered Judaism and Christianity. Then I went out and bought a Quran, and I started studying Arabic. And then I learned of the Islamic doctrine of Naskh. It's, if you want to transliterate it, it's Naskh, I believe. And basically, the Islamic scholars throughout the early medieval period and beyond, they realized that there were so many contradictions in the Quran that they can't just ignore them. And so this doctrine of naskh, and forgive me, I haven't practiced my Arabic in a while, but naskh in Arabic basically means abrogation. And so they said, oh, well, certain passages abolish other passages. It was like inter-Islamic supersessionism, where the later revelations nullified or abrogated the earlier revelations. Now, if you know anything about the Quran, you know that it's written not chronologically, but by the size of the books. And so you have the larger books in front, the smaller books in the back. And if you've ever noticed in the New Testament, that's the same way that the New Testament's organized, where you have the Gospels first, and then the epistles of Paul are organized from the largest epistles first down to the smallest ones. And then you have the Antilogomena, which are the disputed books, like 2 Peter, James, Hebrews, all these. And then Revelation, which I think was also included in the Antilogomena. And again, excuse my Greek. It's all Greek to me. And so, the Islamic scholars had this conundrum where they were trying to figure out, what does Allah actually want us to do? And they didn't know because there were conflicting teachings in the Quran. And I looked at this and I thought, well, this has all the telltale signs of a man-made religion. If it's constantly contradicting itself, and by constantly, I mean there are literally, according to Islamic scholars, fundamentalist Islamic scholars, thousands of contradictions. And they basically just make up, oh, this is the later revelation, so we're going to follow this. Oh, no, this is the later revelation, so we're going to follow that. And that's why you have peaceful Muslims and you have violent Muslims. You have Muslims that are very pro-Jewish and Christian. And you have Muslims, unfortunately the majority, that are anti-Jewish and Christian. So, like, there's a group, I think that they're largely centered in India, the Ahmadis. And apart from believing that their Messiah already has come, again, it's a strange view. And there's like 20 million of these people. It's a pretty large group. But they're like globally renowned for being the most peaceful Muslims. And I'm like, whoa, these people are cool. I like these people. Again, we can disagree with them theologically or doctrinally, but a lot of them seem like really sincere and decent people, morally decent people. But anyway, so there's all these these contradictions in the Quran itself, and then there's even further contradictions between the Quran and the Hadith and the Sunnah, which are like the traditions and the oral law of Islam, the Hadith and the Sunnah. And so I saw all these contradictions, and I thought, well, this has all the telltale signs of a man-made religion. Screw that. And so I screwed it, and I got rid of it. And so that left me with Judaism and Christianity. I studied the entire Tanakh, read it all the way through, word for word, in its English. So I read it all the way through in the translation, and I got to the very, very end of it, and I thought, no matter what in the universe is true, I have not found one contradiction in the text. And for those of you who are going to accuse me of not looking for contradictions, I Googled long lists of contradictions, and I went through them one by one to test. Well, I didn't quite have faith at that point, but test my proto-faith, my nascent faith, my developing faith. I went through every one of these, and I tried to find answers for them. And a lot of the time, these things that were called contradictions, they weren't contradictions. They were things that people found morally objectionable, which, okay, fair enough. But I ultimately came back to, well, if God made the universe, he can do with it whatever he wants. It belongs to him. Right? There's no rule that says God has to do things that are pleasing to me. Right? Oh, well, there's genocide in the Bible. Fantastic. It's God's world. He can do what he wants. Oh, well, there's rape. There's a story where somebody got raped. It's like, well, first of all, it's also condemned in the story. Second of all, again, God could do whatever he wants. Oh, well, Lot offered his daughter to the people of Sodom and Gomorrah. Well, of Sodom. Again, I mean, things come up. Like, God never told Lot to do this. So it's not a contradiction. It's just something that people find problematic. Oh, there's genocide and there's slavery, and oh, it makes me feel uncomfortable. It goes against my modern morality. To hell with your modern morality. If there's no contradictions, I am perfectly fine with accepting a non-self-contradictory, deeply uncomfortable religion. So by the end of reading the Tanakh, or the Christian translation of it, I figured no matter what else is true, Judaism has to be true. And so I read the New Testament, and after that I became Messianic, but I always had a problem with Paul because of, certain famous anti-Torah statements that he makes. And I fully recognize that some of these statements that are called anti-Torah are not actually anti-Torah. I fully recognize this, that a lot of times Paul is taken out of context and he's made to say things that he didn't actually say. With that said, there are, on occasions, when he just strictly abandons the Torah, that he contradicts the Torah. And so eventually I got rid of Paul because it's like, what is he good for? If he's teaching kosher Torah Judaism, then I don't need him. If he's contradicting it, well, then I don't need him, right? So either way, you don't really need him. And eventually then I got to the, oops, knock the microphone here. Eventually I got to the point that I'm at right now. So what does this all to say? It means that when John MacArthur says you can't study your way out of the faith, that is completely wrong. I learned to read the Greek, I learned to read the Hebrew, and by extension the Aramaic. I bought concordances and history books with all the maps and the timelines and everything that you can imagine. I bought study Bibles. I still have multiple versions of the Bible that consult multiple different manuscript families. I studied, like, what is a manuscript family? Right. I have attended probably a dozen different churches. This isn't to say, oh, I'm a great person. It's to say that I did the studying. I went to a Christian university. I studied Bible there. And this isn't some uber liberal one. I went to an evangelical one. And this is just where I ended up. So to say that you can't study your way out of Christianity is so undeniably, emphatically false. And it's such an emphatically arrogant claim that I don't, I really don't get angry at much. I tend to be a very level-headed guy, but this really, I, I almost find it offensive. It is so arrogant. It is so, it's almost leaving me speechless. It's so irritatingly wrong. Like John MacArthur, how arrogant of you to assume that you know every person's experience, or enough of them to draw a blanket generalization, which, there's a place for blanket generalizations. But to say that it's impossible, to say that it never has ever happened, how dare you?
From it. And in it, I explain that my goal was to be a good Christian, to be a better Christian, to examine my beliefs, like John MacArthur said to do. Examine your heart, make sure that you believe the right thing about God, about the Bible. And so I went into a 2-year long journey studying the Bible. I spent money on John MacArthur's books. So to tell his congregation that nobody leaves Christianity or deconstructs from Christianity because they studied the Bible is astronomically false. Like, he could not be further off. If you go and look up why I left Christianity, why I'm deconstructing from Christianity on YouTube, you're going to find hundreds, thousands of people on YouTube, on TikTok, all over the place talking about it. And I would say that probably 80 to 90% of them studied the Bible, were devoted to the faith. They wanted to excel in their relationship with Jesus. They wanted to be a disciple for the Lord, and they wanted to share it with the world. And so they wanted to sharpen their apologetics. They wanted to learn more about their own faith so that they could better defend it. And they kept reading, and things didn't add up. And the apologetics weren't justifying the things that they were supposed to justify. And so people lost faith. They lost belief. It is a natural result of reading something that is so nonsensical. It is a slap in the face to those of us who went through so much pain and anguish and study and confusion and trying so hard and praying for God to show us the truth, to help guide us through our study in the Bible, reading it and trying to become better Christians. So many of us did that. And through that journey, we lost faith. And so this right here shows me he's not listening. I don't know a single person who was deconstructed from Christianity that wasn't so dedicated to it in the first place. that didn't read the Bible for themselves and weren't more dedicated than all of the people around them at their church. We read the Bible. We just didn't like what we found in it, and we didn't like the excuses and the apologetics and the cliches that were given to us when we had questions that couldn't be answered.
They talk about things like, I had a bad experience at church. Somebody abused me. Somebody was unkind to me. There were too many hypocrites. I didn't like the pastor. It was a hassle to try to be who I am. They wouldn't accept me the way I was. I feel mistreated. There was racism. There was misogyny. There was homophobia. There was Christian nationalism. And I even read several articles that said people left evangelicalism because evangelicals vote for Donald Trump.
And on June 14th, 1946, God looked down on his planned paradise and said, I need a caretaker. So God gave us Trump. God said, I need somebody willing to get up before dawn, fix this country, work all day, fight the Marxists, eat supper, then go to the Oval Office and stay past midnight at a meeting of the heads of state. So God made Trump.
Lord, I thank you that America didn't need a preacher in the Oval Office. It did not need a professional politician in the Oval Office, but it needed a fighter and a champion for freedom. And Lord, that's exactly what we have.
Well, I think we've been concerned for many years about secularization of American life, but we haven't paid that much attention to secularization of us. We have conformed to this idea of power and of, in many cases, even vengeance and a siege mentality. And I think there are a lot of evangelical Christians who are starting to get exhausted with that. And you add to it this idea of politics filling the void of a search for meaning of life. I mean, that's politics can never do that. And it's only going to lead to disappointment and disillusionment. I think there are ways that one can look back and see all kinds of harbingers of where things were going. I think particularly of the Glenn Beck Restoring Honor rally on the mall in Washington in 2010, when I started hearing people speak of that as a revival. When in reality, it was resentment, it was politics, it wasn't gospel. That was a real sign that something was happening and something was changing.
And before I hear it from people saying, oh, Christians don't do stuff just because Donald Trump said so, I've heard them do it. It's not very common, but it exists. I have heard Christians say that something was good because Trump said so, as if he was some kind of leader on morality. Which, look, here's the thing. I think that Donald Trump, and this is just my personal opinion, nobody in all of humanity, in all of existence, in all of history, nobody has to agree with me. However, I think that Donald Trump was overall a pretty decent president. I would give him a solid B+. I happen to be a fan, not so much of his person, but of a lot of his policies. Not all of them. In fact, some I would disagree with. Overall, I think that he did a pretty good job. With that said, I'm definitely not a never Trumper. I'm not always a, how do you say this? An always Trumper. I'm not a never Trumper or always Trumper. I am simply myself. I am Jonathan. And as myself, I happen to believe that you shouldn't be following people. You should be following God. And unfortunately, I have seen some Christians say that certain policies should be enacted in the United States simply because Donald Trump said so. And when you challenge them on anything, whether you agree with them or not, because sometimes I do challenge people, even when I agree with them, just to see, okay, are you thinking for yourself when you've come to this conclusion? Or did you just hear it and you're parroting it and you're just repeating it like a parrot? Are you thinking for yourself or are you being told what to think? And unfortunately, too often, people will just repeat things, especially when it comes to things like immigration. This is at least what I've heard the most. They'll make statements on immigration, and then they'll try to use a Bible verse or a New Testament verse to back up what they're saying, even if what they're saying is actually unbiblical. But there are some people, some Christians, that are, and this is just an example, very anti-immigrant because they don't like the immigrants. They'll, and again, I'm just using examples, they'll take immigrants from Germany, from Poland, from Eastern Europe, from England, from the Christian countries, or at least formerly Christian countries, But when it comes to people from South America, which most of South America is Catholic, right? In terms of morality, like they have Christian ethics, they have Christian morals. Again, not all of them, but a lot of them do. And again, they're not perfect, but neither are people in America. So I take that for what you want. But when it comes to people from South America wanting to come up into the US, they have a huge problem with it. Oh, they're bringing over values that, are not compatible with American values. To hell with American values.
Well, I think Christian nationalism is the use of Christian symbols or imagery in order to advance an ethno-nationalist, blood and soil sort of reality. So it's the kind of thing one would see, for instance, at the January 6th insurrection,
Yes.
when there was a Jesus Saves sign right next to makeshift gallows and political violence being used. It's a way to use religion to try to make one's authority ultimate. And I think we've seen that for a long time. In some ways, harnessing religion that way goes all the way back to Pharaoh and Caesar. And we certainly see that happening in Europe. We've seen that for quite a while, of using Christian identity, not in terms of a theological concept or much less a way of living following Christ, but a way of saying we're French or Dutch or American, and we're not whoever the other is. Well, my problem with that is not just that it's destructive of democracy, although it is, it's also heretical. That's just not the gospel of Jesus Christ.
So you mentioned ethno-nationalism there. We had Reverend Jim Wallace on this show last year, and he characterized the support for Trump that comes from evangelicals as coming specifically from white evangelicals, because most black and Latino evangelicals aren't Republicans, aren't Trump supporters in the main. So are we being distracted by religion when the issue here is really about race?
Well, in many cases, yes. There is a sense sometimes that evangelical Christianity is only white American Christianity, when in fact the church is much, much bigger than that. Most Christians in the world today are not white, are not political activists, and have never spoken English. And so I think that reality ought to put a little bit of perspective. And that's one of the reasons why I call my fellow evangelicals to walk in step with our brothers and sisters around the world, most of whom really have not caught this kind of fever of nationalist aspirations.
To hell with American values. Who cares about American values? Why are we not concerned with godly values? And people will get defensive, like, oh, so you don't like the Constitution? I think the Constitution's fine. It's just not the Bible. Oh, so you don't believe in freedom? Well, no, I don't. It's also not a biblical value. Oh, so you don't believe in the Bill of Rights? I think the Bill of Rights can be great, but it's not biblical, Show me the Bill of Rights in the Bible. Show me where freedom of speech is in the Bible. Show me where freedom of religion is in the Bible. If anything, the Bible's anti-free speech and anti-freedom of religion. Why? Because it regulates speech. It regulates religion. There are certain things that we cannot say. For example, we cannot blaspheme God, right? If you have free speech, you're allowed to blaspheme God, right? We can't have other religions. We can't worship other gods. We can't join other cults. And yet, freedom of religion says that you can. So then what are you supposed to do? Be biblical or be American? Our goal should be being biblical. But too many people, and especially too many conservative evangelical Christians, they love being American. And unfortunately, they put their Americanism, their patriotism, their politics ahead of their faith. And they've abandoned their faith for the cult of politics. And that is something that both people that they deconstruct and go to the left, some people deconstruct and they go to the right. That seems to be a pretty common complaint, is that it is too politicized. Get politics out of religion, right? The religion will have perspectives on political issues. I completely agree with that, but I don't want to hear about a campaign. I don't want to hear about politicians. I don't want to hear about, tax reform. Well, when I was a Christian, going to church, or being Jewish, going to shul, going to the synagogue. Get that crap out of here. I want to know about God, not the tax code. Come on. And there, like I said, there will always be political issues that are relevant to we religious people. I understand that. I accept that. I fully agree with that. But let's depoliticize religion, right? Christians of all flavors should be able to work together regardless of political affiliation. And unfortunately, there are too many Christians that will hate other Christians because of their political affiliation. Anyway, continuing.
I don't think you really want to consign yourself to eternal hell because you're anti-Donald Trump.
People did not leave evangelical Christianity because people were voting for Donald Trump. People left evangelical Christianity because the people who were voting for Donald Trump were aligning themselves with his morals and his values. And those people were the people in the church. Those were the evangelical Christians. The same people that raised us in Sunday school, teaching us to be humble and meek and quiet and to love people, to show compassion, to be forgiving, to be nice, to stand up for the marginalized, to hate greed. Donald Trump stood for everything that Jesus stood against. And Donald Trump stood against everything Jesus stood for. They taught us, what would Jesus do? Love like Jesus. And we did it, and they got mad. And they said, no, don't do that. Vote for this guy. Vote for Donald Trump. The guy who brags about sexually assaulting women. Who brags about his money. Who says he can do anything in the world. He could shoot someone in the middle of Fifth Avenue and nobody would care. He was nothing like the Jesus that they were feeding us. And so when we see the contradictions, and we see that everyone in the church is aligning themselves with someone that doesn't look anything like the morals that they're teaching in the church, people are going to question that. People are going to question what's going on. And they should. And my mind is blown that he says that he realizes people are leaving the church because they feel mistreated, because they're not being accepted, they're not being cared for, that there's too many hypocrites, that people were unkind, that people were abusive. He says these things. He understands that this is happening to people. And instead of loving them like Jesus, instead of going after them and showing them compassion, he wants the church to shun them. He wants the church to mistreat them even more. He goes on to say, after this, the bottom line is that people just love sin. They just want to leave because they love sin. And yet he listed all of these reasons that people are leaving that to me look like sin.
And that's the thing, is that you are capable of studying your way out of Christianity. And while some people do go to the left, some people go to the right. That was the case with me. I looked at Christianity and I saw a lot of godlessness. And no, it just wasn't my local church. It wasn't my particular denomination. I looked at people that I met on the street, people I met online, people I met at work, people I met in, yes, my local church, people on TV, people out in the world at the grocery store, that it was just running rampant with immorality, you know? And I remember I asked one of my coworkers one time, it was this young white girl who was converting to Islam. And so I was just curious to get to know her and to see why she was converting to Islam, because, you know, hopefully try to nudge her a little bit, give her a friendly, persuasive influence, bring her over to Judaism. But I was asking her why she was interested in converting to Islam. She grew up Catholic, and she looked me in the face and said, it's because of the immorality. Right? There are people who leave Christianity because Christianity as an institution, as a religion, doctrinally, practically, is immoral, or at least contains immorality. And that's the issue for a lot of people. Now, like I said, some people look at the immorality of the church and they become even more immoral. They're like, well, if everybody's doing it, I might as well too. Or they look at the immorality and they say, you know, the immoral things that matter to me, the judgmentalness, the lack of curiosity, the lack of curiosity under certain circumstances is a sin. We have an obligation to be curious, right? There's the verse that says, seek the Lord where he may be found. We are commanded to seek. We are commanded to be curious. We're commanded to study. And sometimes people just don't have the vessels to contain the light, as we would say. Sometimes people don't have the guidance. They don't have the knowledge. They don't have, they haven't prepared themselves internally, spiritually. And, you know, they go off the derech in a general sense, right? They go off into atheism. They go off into all these other philosophies. And then some people, they go the other way. They go much further the other way. And they become so deeply religious and they start caring about morality so deeply, not where they're going around judging everyone, but where they recognize that love is also part of morality, but also that justice is part of morality, but also that kindness is part of morality, but also that righteousness is part of morality, right? They recognize that there is a balance. It's not all about love. It's not all about the touchy-feelies, the fluffy emotions. It's about having a balanced morality and about how would you say this? Out moralizing. Although moralizing is a bad thing, right? Trying to preach at people. Um, Maybe not an immoral thing, but it's an irritating thing for sure because because it's usually the people who think that they're better than you that are actually worse than you. Ironically,
They
but
went out from
that's
us,
beside the point.
but they were not really of us. If they had been of us, they would have what? Remained with us. But they went out so that it would be known and shown that they all are not of us. When somebody defects, they didn't lose their salvation. They never had it.
It's really important to understand that this is a manipulation tactic. This is a way to gaslight you into questioning your own journey and your experience, but you know your journey better than anybody else does. And if you did the work, if you put the effort and the faith into finding Jesus or looking for Jesus, praying to Jesus, asking for that salvation, asking for a relationship with him, if you did that and he chose not to save you, that's on him.
Yeah, and whatever happened to one of Christianity's favorite verses? Whoever shall call on the name of the Lord shall be saved. Whatever happened to that?
It's him intentionally not saving you when you did what you were supposed to do to be saved. If you never had your salvation in the first place, then that means God ignored you when you came to him. And that doesn't really align with what they tell you when you want to be saved. They do the altar call and they say, come up to the front, say the prayer, repent and believe. You will be saved. He'll save you right in this moment. You can guarantee that you'll go to heaven. And you do that, and then you walk away because it's all nonsensical. And they say, well, you were never really saved in the first place, so it doesn't matter. That's just manipulation. It's just a tactic they use so that they can maintain their own faith, their own security in their own faith, and they don't have to believe that somebody who actually had faith could walk away.
Examine your own heart to be certain you're in the faith. Let's bow in prayer.
And then he ends by encouraging you to deconstruct your faith. Examine your faith, deconstruct it, carefully and critically look at your beliefs to make sure that they are true. This was such a fascinating sermon. It was all over the place. And, now that I am so far on the other side, I'm so far out of Christianity, this stuff sounds absolutely bonkers to me. And it's so easy to just look at it and see the inconsistencies and see the fallacies. But when you're new, this can be very confusing because the language that he uses is very slick. It's very tricky. And if you don't know how to spot manipulation tactics, if you don't know how to spot fallacies, it can be very easy to fall for stuff like this. And really all this is guilt and manipulation. This is tactics meant to control you, to keep you from leaving the church. And why? Why does John MacArthur not want you to leave the church? He needs people in the seats. That is his livelihood. His livelihood is the church, just like every other pastor out there. They need people clinging to Christianity. They need it to fill their pews. They need it to fill the offering plates. They need it to sell their books or their YouTube videos. They need people in Christianity to maintain their own livelihood and to maintain their own faith.
No, I'm not generally a fan of the, oh, you're just doing it because you love money. Some people do just love money. However, in this instance and in many other instances as well, I'm convinced that John MacArthur and people like him genuinely and sincerely want people to be saved because they believe that that's the best thing to do. I don't believe that John MacArthur is just trying to sell you his books, just trying to rip off stupid, ignorant lemmings to try to make money off of them. There are people that do that, but I don't think that men in his position or women in a similar position that they're just trying to make money off of people. I think that is very disingenuous just to say, oh, you're just trying to make money. You're just doing this because you like money. You're just trying to get paid. You don't really mean that. No, I'm convinced that John MacArthur and people like him genuinely, truly have a concern for people's souls. They just happen to be wrong.
This is, in my opinion, why they're discouraging people from leaving. They're scared. They see the drop in attendance. They're not stupid. They know that church attendance is dropping at a drastic rate because people, they don't find this stuff compelling anymore. We don't believe it anymore. We're not buying what you're selling. And so they have to come up with all these reasons people are leaving. They can't just look internally. They can't look around and at their doctrine, at their church, at the mistreatment, at the abuse, at the hypocrisy, at the racism, at the homophobia, at the Christian nationalism. The very things he listed. He showcased what is wrong with the church today and why people are leaving. And he still wants to focus on shunning the people leaving rather than the people that are staying and doing the things that they shouldn't be doing. He says people leaving love sin. No, people leaving hate sin. At least how a lot of us are defining it these days, which is mistreatment and abuse, which is harming people, treating people unkindly. That, to me, if sin exists, that's what sin is. And I didn't leave the church because of mistreatment, although I was mistreated. I left because I wanted to be a better Christian, because I read and studied the Bible over and over again, and I came to the conclusion that it wasn't true.
Alrighty, that wraps up our video for today in both parts 1 and 2. If you have enjoyed these videos and if you're a fan of the content that we try to put out, then make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. Leave a comment below because, as you know, as every other channel is insisting that you know, that these things do actually help the YouTube algorithm. Some of this knowledge actually comes from YouTube itself, which is owned by Google. And Google makes sure to tell us these things when we go into the studio tab of our channel. They give us these tips and tricks, and these are some of the things that actually help drive traffic to the channel. So if you're a fan of the channel, bring more people along with you. Let's have a party. And you can do that by liking, sharing, subscribing, and doing everything that else you do, which is being yourself, being the best person that you can be. How does that help the algorithm? I don't know. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it does. I would like to think that it does. So until next time, take care.